Good morning. It's so good to see so many faces here today. And I see some faces I haven't seen before, and it's good to see you here as well. Welcome. And Brother Paul was saying I was looking for a place to put the umbrella. I did find a place. Right up here is the umbrella that I found. Found a place to put it. You know, it is raining today. And in our story in the lesson, remember how Ahab and Jezebel and Elijah, went up on Mount Carmel. And after that experience, Elijah prayed for rain. Now, there's a story where there was a drought like that, and they were praying for rain. And everybody came together and prayed for rain. But there's a couple differences. Everybody was dressed basically in a shirt, but there was only one umbrella. What did that mean? Who had the faith for the rain? The one with the umbrella. And we're going to be speaking about faith this morning, faith and doubt. And I'd like us to think about, do we have faith? Let's turn in our Bibles to 2 Peter 1:4. 2 Peter 1:4. And I'm going to be asking a few questions this morning, and I will invite some answers as I ask the questions as well. Let's look in 2 Peter 1, 4 through 8. Whereby are given unto us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these ye might be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. And besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience, and to patience godliness, and to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness charity. For if these things be in you and abound, they make you that ye shall neither be barren nor unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, faith, you notice there, this is Peter's ladder, but where does faith come in there? What order of things does faith come in? It's the very first step there. This is why faith is important. I know that we're studying in our study there last night. We studied some on faith. And I'd like to look at the definition of faith. What is the definition of faith? Does someone have a definition they'd like to say? Hebrews 11:1, which says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. What's another definition? Consistency? Persistency, yes, as in prayer. Anybody else have another definition? How about belief? That's a common one. There's also a saving faith. The difference between just believing and actually having a saving faith. Faith isn't a feeling. Now, there are some elements of faith that we can have that you might say there are elements of faith that are meant that we can think of. I'd like for you to tell me some elements of faith that you understand some elements of faith, and I'll give you an example. An element of faith is that it can be kindled. In other words, it can be started. And an illustration of that is like, the story of the two disciples that went to Emmaus and how Christ walked along with them. And remember how they said our hearts burned within us? There was a kindling of that faith. So this is an element of faith. It can be kindled. What are some other elements of faith that you can think of? It can be increased. Can we think of an example of how it can be increased? Exercise, yes. There's a story of where it says, Lord, help thou mine unbelief. I believe, help thou my unbelief. There can be increased. And it can be exercised. What else? What's another element of faith? It can be strengthened. And if it can be strengthened, what else can happen to it? It can be weakened. It can be made perfect. How is it made perfect? By works? Trials, the trying of your faith, that's right. It can be strong. Let's look in Matthew 21:21. Shows how faith can be strong. What can faith do? Would someone like to read that for me? Matthew 21:21. Someone like to read that for me? Thank you.
Jesus answered and said unto them, Verily I say unto you, if ye have faith and doubt not, ye shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if ye shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done.
Can we lift a mountain? We have the strength to lift a mountain and throw it into the sea. How do we do that? By faith. And faith is something. It's not just a figment of our imagination. It is a thing. What else about faith? Faith can be rewarded, can't it? Let's look at Luke 17. Luke 17. 17:12. This is speaking about the cleansing of the lepers. And it came to pass, Jesus, he went to Jerusalem, and he passed through the midst of Samaria, and he entered a village. And here the lepers came to him, and they wanted to be cleansed, and they went on to show themselves to the priests, and they were rewarded because of their faith. They acted on that, and they were rewarded. Faith can be dead. Without works, faith is dead. And faith can be perverted. Faith frees us. Let's look at Galatians 3:25. What does it say? Galatians 3:25. It says, But after that faith is come, we are no longer under a schoolmaster. Galatians 3:25. So therefore, faith can free us. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. As we look at faith, as we understand faith, how we think, we either move forward or we move backward, as our faith is. I'd like to look at the story of the Israelites as they came on to the borders of the land of Canaan. There were certain spies that went into the land, and they came back. They carried this fruit with them. And as the spies came back, they were all giving a good report, weren't they? They were saying how beautiful the land was, how lush it was. It was truly a land flowing with milk and honey. But then there was a group of people that said, there are giants, there are cities that we can't overcome. Did they have faith, or did they have doubt? What were they wearing? What was their experience? Which one did they have? The ones that were doubting. The 10 spies, they had doubt, didn't they? However, there were 2 that had the faith, and they said, we are well able to overcome it, Caleb and Joshua. And these 2 went in 40 years later into the land of Canaan. And which area did Caleb get? What did he ask for?
The giant land.
He asked for the giant land. He asked for that hard city, and he overcame that city, the land of the giants. No truth does the Bible set forth in clearer light than the peril of even one departure from the right. Peril both to the wrongdoer and to all whom his influence shall reach. Example has a wonderful power, and when cast on the side of evil tendencies of our nature, it becomes well nigh irresistible. Here the 10 spies cast their doubt on the side of disbelief, and it influenced the whole company. And the 2 that had the faith could not overcome that. The strongest bulwark of vice in our world is not the iniquitous life. It is not the iniquitous life of the abandoned sinner or the degraded outcast. So the strongest bulwark of vice in our world is a life which otherwise appears virtuous, honorable, and noble, but in which one sin is fostered, one vice indulged. To the soul that is struggling in secret against some giant temptation, trembling upon the very verge of the precipice, such an example is one of the most powerful enticements to sin. He who endowed the high conceptions of life and truth and honor does yet willfully transgress one precept of God's holy law, has perverted his noble gifts into a lure to sin. Our influence is strong, isn't it? And as we take Christ into our lives are to transform. But there are those around us. And I know each of us also struggle with sin and doubt and faith. And we can help each other to have that faith or to doubt. When I was not so young, well, I should say when I was young, younger than Daniel, probably about 18 or so, I experimented with some, what should I say, minerals. I'm not sure exactly how to name it. I don't want to say what it was, but it's something that was explosive, you might say, quite explosive. And we were, my cousin and I, we were making these things, firecrackers, whatever. Well, after I got married, I had some of this stuff left over, and I didn't want anybody to get hurt with it. So I took and I put it all together, and I said, I'll get rid of it. So I went to light it. Well, when it's out like that, it doesn't do much. It just sort of burns, I thought. Well, it didn't do anything. It just sort of like that. So I put it up to my face like this, and I blew on it. No. It blew up in my face. You know, one little thing, we don't realize what one little sin will do. I should have known better. It gave me burns across my face, and I put aloe vera on it and all that stuff, and everything was all right. But it could have blinded me. It could have done a lot. Sports tend to decrease our relish for life's sober realities and its tranquil enjoyments. Thus the door is open to dissipation and lawlessness with their terrible results. Sometimes we don't realize the little things that can devastate one's life. I'd like to read another. There is no influence in our land more powerful to poison the imagination, to destroy religious impressions, and to blunt the relish for the tranquil pleasures and sober realities of life. What do you suppose that would be? Theatrical amusements. That's not going to the theater, is it? I mean, that is, but it's more than that. I'd like to read that again. There is no influence in our land more powerful to poison the imagination, to destroy religious impressions, and to blunt the relish for the tranquil pleasures and sober realities of life than theatrical amusements. We can kill faith by what we do, or we can encourage faith. We can make it grow, we can destroy it. We have some choices to make that we can lay aside some things that will help, that our faith will grow. If you look on the front of your bulletin, you'll see a story. What's that story about? Now, that's just a picture. What's that picture about? I'd like to look at that story. It's one of my favorite stories, and I think it's a favorite story of many, and that's the story of David and Goliath, right? Now, this story is found in 1 Samuel 17:4. I'd like to look at some of the elements there that David exhibited in this experience there, because he had faith. He exhibited the faith. And as he was coming before the Israelites, he came to the camp of the Israel. What did he see? What did he hear? But he heard this giant there coming and boasting against the God of Israel. All of Israel was quaking in their boots. They were quivering. But did they have to? Why didn't they have to? Where was their faith? And by the way, I would like to give an assignment to the young people and anybody else that would like to. I forgot to do this at the beginning, so you have to write down a few ahead of me. I'd like you to write down the number of times that I say faith. Want me to start over? We'll give you 25 to begin with. Okay? I'm sure it's been that. So, if you get a piece of paper out and you can write down 25 and then start from there. How many times do I use the word faith? Many times. Okay, but see, faith is a foundational principle or thing of our lives. We must have faith in our lives. So, here David, as he came to this experience of seeing the enemy, he came to Saul, and in verse 32 of 1 Samuel, would someone like to read that for me? 1 Samuel 17:32. 1 Samuel 17:32. Who would like to read that for me?
And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine."
Let no man's heart fail. In other words, don't be afraid. Have faith. But he said he would go to fight this Philistine. Now, how big was David? At this time, he was a young man. I don't know. He was not in his army, not in Saul's army. He was at home feeding the sheep or taking care of the sheep. So he was not really old. And Saul didn't want to let him go to fight Goliath. Now, why didn't he? Saul was still in the camp of doubt. He didn't have the faith that David could do anything. But David knew that he could, but there was a reason that David knew that he could. And let's look at verse he gave the experience, I'm not sure which verse it is,
34.
of the lion and the bear. 34. It says, and David said to Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of the mouth. And he arose against me, and I caught him by his beard. So David had already experienced the confidence of putting his trust in the Lord. Did he take that credit to himself? No, he didn't. Because it says that in verse 37, God said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with you. Saul was not necessarily confident that David would overcome the Philistine, but he gave him permission. And David was confident that he could because he had experienced it before. Each of us have a measure of faith given to us. Each of us have faith. And it's what we do with that faith that makes the difference on how we approach things, how we look at things, and how we face the difficulties and the trials before us. Whether we come with doubt or whether we come with faith at each trial and each difficulty, how we face these things. David came with faith. And so David was given the armor of Saul, and here he goes out to battle with this armor, and he goes out a little ways and he turns around and he comes back. A coward, right? He didn't come back a coward. He already had the armor on before Saul gave him his armor, didn't he? He already had the shield of faith. And so he could not use Saul's armor because it didn't fit him. It was Saul's armor. So he put off that armor, and he went out to fight the Goliath. And as he went out to fight Goliath, he went down into the stream, and he had his simple things that he had with him. He had the staff. He had a little pouch that he could carry his things in, and he had a sling, and he had God. Even though he had simple things, he had God on his side. And as he went down to the stream, he bent down and he picks up these 5 little smooth stones. What's he going to do with those stones? And we know the story. It's too familiar to us sometimes. But how can we take that? He put the faith in God, but yet he still did something. He took simple things and he did what he could. He obeyed God's leading and he used what he had. Sometimes we come across trials and we say, I can't overcome that. I can't do anything about that. But yet we don't even use what we have. If we step forward and trust the Lord to multiply or to give us strength or to even give us wisdom, he will, as he did David. So he took these 5 stones. There's only one Goliath. But he took 5 stones.
Well, I have 4 more brothers.
Thank you. They're going to come after me, huh? I got 4 more for you, too. He had faith. He knew he didn't have to fear. And that was a warning to the others, wasn't it? And they were eventually destroyed as well, his 4 brothers, were they not? So David took these stones. And as Goliath looks down there and sees this little guy down there coming up the hill to him, what does he do? But he pushes back his helmet. He's brazen. He's not fearful at all. And he's defiant. And again, as we see in the story of Elijah was not so concerned about his own what should I say, honor, but he was concerned about God's honor. David was not so concerned about his own safety, but he was concerned about God's honor. And Goliath was defying his God, the only true God, which is our God as well. When that happens, we know the victory is sure. We know we don't have to fear when there's a defiance against God. And when we know we are in the right, we have no fear. So David took and slew Goliath in the faith of God. That's how he faced the battle. By faith. That is the faith that we are to have. There are many stories of faith, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. I'd like to ask a question. I'd like some answers. Just for interest's sake, you might say, I would like to have you tell me, without going to your little iPads, how many times the word faith is used in the entire Bible. Just the word faith, not faithful and those kind of words, but just the word faith. How many times is it used in the whole entire Bible?
1,000.
1,000, okay.
10,000.
10,000? Getting brave. Any others? Okay. Now, what? You have 1,000, 10,000. What should we go? 5,000 as a medium? Now, of that 5,000, let's just say, not saying 1,000 is bad. What is the percentage of the verses in the Old Testament now that use the word faith? Just in the Old Testament. How many words would be in the Old Testament of faith? Did I see your 500? Huh? 500 of 5,000, that's what, 10%? Okay. There were 231 in the whole Bible. And there are only 2 in the Old Testament of the word faith itself, which is very interesting to me because faith is so fundamental, isn't it? But yet it is illustrated. It is shown. It is in the stories and all. It's not that faith isn't there by any means, because the Old Testament points to Christ, doesn't it? All the way through the Old Testament, it is faith pointing to Christ. And in the New Testament, many times Christ said, "Thy faith hath made thee whole, and go and sin no more," and things like this. I'd like to look at another story. The story of Gideon. Now, Gideon, during the time of Gideon, it seems like the Israelites were always in a pickle where they were being harassed or whatever by the enemies. And during the time of Gideon was no different than those. But there's a reason it was, is because they weren't following the Lord. The Israelites were turning aside, and so the Lord would have to send these people to help to get their minds back. And there came an angel of the Lord to Gideon. And the story is in Judges 6. Judges chapter 6. If you want to turn to it, we won't be using a lot of verses, but we can refer to it there. Judges chapter 6, verses 1 and onward. And in verse 11, it talks about an angel coming to Gideon. And here, Gideon this was a time of wheat threshing, wasn't it? And he was threshing wheat in the wine press. What was he doing threshing wheat in the wine press? He was hiding. Because there wasn't supposed to be any wine, so that's where they wouldn't look. They'd be looking the other way. So here this angel came to him, and he gave him a call. In verse 14 it says, "And the Lord looked upon him and said, Go in thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee?" Now we were reading last night, when God says something, what does it do? What is it when God says something? It's true, it creates, it's a fact. God said something. And here it says, Go, have not I sent thee? Save Israel. So Gideon was asked to go and save Israel. And by that very command, God would save Israel through Gideon. And you know the story of how the various things that took place, but I'd like to look at one thing. There's something that had to happen before Gideon could go out and save Israel. What was that had to take place? The first thing he did, yes?
He has to reform his own house.
That's right. He had to take and he had to cast down the altars of his own house to the god of, what's the god? Baal. The altar of Baal of his own father. And here he was. This is the very first thing he had to do, is to tear this thing down. And as we take our faith, as we take a step, sometimes we may have something that may trip us up that we need to take out of the way. We need to cast down so that our faith can grow. So here, he cast these things down, and the city came out and wanted to stone Gideon, but his father protected him. Then, I'm just going down through the story quickly, because he was called then to blow a trumpet in verse 34. But then verse 36 says, I'd like to read that, because sometimes the Lord takes what we understand, what we know, and he wants to strengthen it. And here Gideon wanted to make sure that he was hearing correctly. I don't believe it was here that he was doubting, but that he wanted to hear correctly. In verse 36, "And Gideon said unto God, If thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, as thou hast said, behold, I will put a fleece of wool in the floor. And if the dew be on the fleece only, and it be dry on all the earth beside, then shall I know that thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, and as thou hast said." So was the fleece wet or dry? It was wet, because that's what Gideon had asked. But then he reversed it and says, in verse 39, "And Gideon said unto God, Let not thine anger be hot against me, and I will speak but this once. Let me prove, I pray thee, but this once with the fleece. Let it now be dry only upon the fleece and upon all the ground, and let there be dew on the ground." And God did so that night. How many times do we face decisions and we don't know which way to go? It's not that our faith is wavering, but we oftentimes will face perplexities and difficulties, and we want to do the Lord's will. We want to do what he would have us to do. And you've heard the expression, put the fleece out. And there's ways that we can do that. And God will honor as we walk in his ways, as he did with Gideon. And so, as Gideon went forth, he called all of Israel. And there were, how many people came out? 32,000? 32,000 came out to his call, to follow, to obey the call to battle. This story has always been a fascinating fascination to me, because here he had 32,000, which I don't remember how many there were of the enemy. There was of the Amalekites. I don't know, maybe someone can... How many?
The opposite is 200,000.
200,000.
32,000.
200,000. I'd forgotten to look that up here. So you have this 22,000, 32,000, which is a small number compared to the over 200,000. And here God says to Gideon, there's too many. And in verse 3 of chapter 7, it says, Then Zerubbabel, who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched his tent. Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's verse 7:3, yes. Now therefore go to proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, Whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained but 10,000. So 10,000 then to 200,000. What's the percentage there? I think it's about 2%. What's that? Not 20%. 20,000 to 200,000. Is that 20%? What's that? 10%. Yeah. 10%. And the Lord said to Gideon, The people are yet too many. Bring them down into the water, and I will try them there for thee. And it shall be that whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And whosoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So, how many were left? 300. What percentage is that? That's not 1%. That's less than 1% of the people. Why did God do this? God could have saved by many, or he could save by few, couldn't he? And as we face difficulties and trials, our faith can overcome these things. We can have, how should I say it? We don't have to look at our circumstances to know that God is in control and he will take care. But God did something for Gideon. And he was asked to go down into the camp. And here he went down with one other person into the camp of the Midianites and the Amalekites. And it says there in starting with verse 12, And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the sea for multitude. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellows, and said, Behold, I dreamed a dream. And lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came unto a tent, and smote it, that it fell, and overturned it, that the tent lay along. And his fellow answered and said, This is none else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. For unto his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. Did God have to do this? He didn't have to have Gideon go down into that camp and stand by that tent and listen and hear that. But Gideon needed that. He needed the encouragement. And sometimes we need to encourage others. We need encouragement ourselves. And we can help each other in strengthening each other's faith. The Lord can use us, as he did that one in the tent, in the dream. So then Gideon went back up, encouraged, and he divided his host, and he went around, and he gathered, three companies around the camp of the enemy. And they went up on the top of the mountain, and there they stood. And they broke their pitchers, and they blew the trumpets, and they stood still. Sometimes when we come to trials, and sometimes when we come to difficulties, God doesn't ask us to take care of the problems. But if we do what we know to be that He puts before us, and we can't go any further, sometimes He asks us to stand still. And here Gideon stood still, and who fought the battle? God fought the battle. Sometimes we take things into our own hands, and we know we can do it, and we make a mess of things. But if we ask the Lord to take care of it, sometimes we can't take care of things. We ask the Lord to take care of it, and we break our pitcher, blow the trumpet, we stand still and wait for the salvation of the Lord. He can work in our lives tremendously, and He can work in others' lives and other experiences as well tremendously. I'd like to encourage each of you to look at the stories of faith in the Bible. There are many stories that we can be encouraged by. And I'd like to read 1 Peter 1. If we'd like to turn to that, 1 Peter 1, verse 6. 1 Peter 1,